Hello everybody and welcome to this afternoon's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about navigating digital change, a topic that's definitely at the forefront of most organisations' minds at the moment, as well as ours personally. And we've got some great speakers today. I'm going to be one of them. I've also got my colleague Chris Tuck and also one of our clients, Steve Harris. So before I pass you on to Steve to introduce himself, and then Chris, who will do the same and also run through the agenda for today, I'll just give you a bit of background to myself. I'm actually involved both with the CMI Women London board, as well as having a day job at a consulting firm called Oaklin, who are specialists in advising and shaping and delivering transformations for our clients across a really strong, broad industry set. And we can't wait to tell you a bit more about that as the webinar goes along. So before I pass you on to Steve, a bit of background to me before I joined Oaklin. I'm a change management specialist, and I'm really passionate about the people side of change. And this is really important for managing digital transformations too, which is what we're going to talk to you about today. So just a bit of housekeeping. If you can see, there'll be a live comment section to the right of your screen. So please say hello, ask questions, post comments, engage, chat to each other. We want to see as many of you as possible. So this really does feel like an actual event. I can see we've already got people coming from as far as Australia. So it's really good to see a broad set of people. And on that point, I will hand you over to Steve.
Hi, and good afternoon. Thank you for joining. My name's Steve Harris. I'm head of IT for digital marketing and integration at SSE Energy Services, which is the part of the energy company that was purchased by OVO at the beginning of the year. I've been there 4 years, supporting various technology capabilities within that organisation, and we'll talk about a bit more about that later on through this webinar. Prior to SSE, I was with Centrica British Gas for just under 4 years, also on the IT and digitalisation part there as well. And prior to that, I was 15 years at Virgin Atlantic, working through operations and then coming into project and program management and specializing in the tech IT part of digital as it matured, as DevOps and Agile and all that came along. So really pleased to be part of this conversation today, and I'll just pass you over now to Chris Tuck to introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Katie. So I'm Chris Tuck. I've worked in technology consulting for 15 years. Typically focusing on complex project and program delivery, and I've had the privilege of working with some fantastic people across a variety of client organizations and sectors. I joined Oaklin about 4 years ago, and I lead our digital practice with the goal of consciously helping our clients to shape and accelerate delivery of their digital transformation strategies. I'm also really pleased to be joining you all today to share a bit about what we understand of digital, and specifically digital transformation and digital change management. So before I dive in, it'd be great to just go over what we have in store for this conversation. Just wait for the agenda to come up there. So we'll talk a bit about what it is and why it's more important than ever. We'll talk a bit about digital change management and why that differs from digital transformation in general. We've got a wonderful case study about what to do when digital goes wrong, and then we'll have a few minutes at the end there for an opportunity for anyone in the audience to ask questions. We'll be really happy to take those. So just to start then, so what do we mean by digital transformation? So for me, digital transformation describes how modern technologies and ways of working are applied to improve human experience, accelerate the route organizations take to get their goods and services into the hands of their users, whether that be customers, employees, or even citizens, experiment and push boundaries, and also to gain insight that can identify opportunities for further investment, for further development, or even to pivot to something altogether different. Fundamentally, it stems from technology and advancements that have been made over the last 20 or 25 years. Typically, we think of digital as linked with the emergence of the internet in the early 90s, and exemplified by companies such as Amazon, who you all know as the online bookstore that is now one of the biggest brands in the world, all powered through a digital platform providing digital services via digital channels and integrated logistics. That said, digital is not just about technology. It is a very broad topic, and a simple Google of the term digital transformation will render about 500 million results. It brings along its fair share of jargon, which doesn't always help to win supporters. And this also means different people will have their own definition that they prefer, as I'm sure mine will be subtly different to that of Katie's and Steve's. In fact, now would be quite a nice opportunity to ask you, the audience, what your own definition of digital is and which one do you best associate with. And you'll hopefully be able to see the comment box that you can tap that into. Now, when it comes to delivering digital transformation, I see three different layers that need consideration. There's the digital frontiers, which is the part of digital that typically receives all of the headlines. It is the cutting edge of technology that will radicalize industry and the world, such as artificial intelligence or Internet of Things, robotics, or augmented reality and virtual reality. Then there's the digital enablers, which are the foundation or infrastructure for digital change and is what really enables the digital frontier layer to do what it does. Things like clouds or integration via APIs or application programming interfaces and data analytics. And then there's digital methods, which is the way in which digital transformation can be done, for example, via agile methods or lean principles and DevOps ways of working. A digital transformation initiative can either focus on a single aspect of this model or cut across all three of these layers to achieve a target outcome. An example might be a website monitoring tool that is hosted in the cloud, provided via software as a service, and delivered with an organization via agile methods. And this would go to help operations teams who look after that website to remove any obstacles and harness opportunities by seeing how their user base are interacting with the website. Then there is digital change and digital change management. Despite transformation and change being very similar words in the English language, they mean slightly different things in the workplace. And whilst I have attempted to describe digital transformation, for me, digital change is focused more on the people and culture aspect of digital. It describes how we can bring about a shift in the cultural mindset to embrace curiosity, experimentation, innovation, continuous change, and really to challenge the norm. Now, before the current coronavirus, so just waiting for the slide there. So yes, before the current coronavirus situation occurred, digital was important, and particularly organizations needing to have an effective digital transformation strategy was important. You only have to look at the top 5 companies listed by market capitalization to see the immense value that can be created through fostering a digital culture and utilizing a digital platform to offer digital products and services. Companies such as Facebook or Apple, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft take all of the top spots, with some even surpassing the $1 trillion point. Now, it wouldn't be right to talk about coronavirus without first acknowledging that it is first and foremost a tragedy for hundreds of thousands of people around the world. It has brought harm to and negatively impacted many people, and it has forced us into a lockdown and a very alternative way of living our lives, from socializing, exercising, learning, and working. At the same time, for most people, it has brought a new perspective to how we operate and propelled the use of technology across many aspects of our daily lives. For people having to remain home, companies have had to enhance existing or find new ways to come to them. Many shops have had to transform into a near equivalent of distribution centers, and those companies that do not have an online presence or ability to plug themselves into logistic frameworks have really suffered and had to pause business. Now, specific examples of areas that big change has been incurred during this period. Well, we've mentioned e-commerce. Supermarkets have seen an increase of 219% of online customers. Collaboration tools have seen, apps like Zoom have seen a massive increase, with Zoom being the top rated app on Apple's App Store, with daily usage reported up over 300% from before the pandemic hit. Microsoft has also seen a staggering 775% increase in calls made via the Microsoft Teams app. Media streaming, paid for subscriptions for streaming TV and video, such as Netflix and Disney Plus, have all jumped 32% since the beginning. And closer to home, the UK government have launched the job retention scheme via HMRC in little over a month, and the Track and Trace app is now being piloted across the Isle of Wight. In any conclusion, digital remains key for our economy. The IDC expects worldwide spending on the technologies and services that enable digital transformation to reach $2.3 trillion in 2023. And whilst COVID has seen an overall downward impact on spending on IT, this is limited to spending on what we call traditional IT, such as legacy-related hardware, software, services, and telecoms. The IDC goes on to predict that actually over the next 5 years, all growth in tech spending will be driven by 4 platforms: cloud, mobile, social, and big data analytics. Meanwhile, the cost savings generated by those investments will see more spending diverted towards the newer digital frontier technologies such as AI, robotics, and augmented reality and virtual reality. So this brings me to a question. How can we enable proper change and cultural change via digital change management to embrace this investment? And with that, I'll hand over to Katie to take us through the next part. You might want to come off mute, Katie.
That would be useful, thank you. So as Chris mentioned, there are 3 layers of digital transformation, and one of the key ones that underpin successful digital transformation is digital culture, mindset, and ways of working. And we really need to focus on this to make sure that the technology works from a people perspective. So before I explore bespoke approaches to change management specifically for digital transformations, I'd just like to remind everybody of what digital change management is anyway. So as Chris asked, if you wouldn't mind popping what you describe digital change management or change management anyway, as you understand it in the comments bar, it will be really interesting to know how you perceive this. But drawing on a really, really useful definition that I like to use, both when reminding myself as a subject matter expert in change management, and also when explaining change management for those that are a bit unfamiliar with the term, ProSci highlights it as change management is the process, tools, and techniques to manage the people side of change to achieve a required business outcome, which I think is a really strong statement and really focuses clearly on the fact that it's about people and that transformation will never work unless you focus on actually bringing people on that journey with you and preparing them to work in future states. So this part of the presentation is going to explore the different approaches for change management that you should focus on when dealing with a digital transformation. An example of this will be using digital communications or an agile change methodology as well. I really like that the definition of change management that's just appeared there, ensuring the organisation survives change. Change can often be quite a stressful situation for lots of employees. So the word survive is a really good way to describe that, and make it a pleasant experience is what we would aim to do with change management as well. Thank you very much. So as practitioners, we all use different sets of tools, methods, best practices in order to aid transformation in whatever form we are involved in that. And change management practitioners do exactly the same. So I've adapted an approach that I would use to focus here, as you can see on this slide, 4 key aspects that I think we should focus on when talking about digital change management specifically. The first being agreeing digital vision, building digital capability, enabling digital behaviours, and also delivering and managing change digitally. So first of all, agreeing a digital vision. I think we'd all agree that it's important that organisations have visions overall for what their company is setting out to achieve. And this is also particularly relevant for a digital perspective too. And this should be translated down into the transformation level and at a programme and project level as well. Visions are generally used as a key change management tool in order to engage people in the change, help them along the journey, and help them understand how they can support their organisation in actually reaching that end state. And when we talk about digital visions specifically, we should really highlight that they need to be simple and easy to understand. They should avoid the use of jargon so people can really invest in them and understand what the digital transformation is aiming to achieve. And one I've come across recently that really, really resonated with me was FedEx Digital's vision, which reads as, FedEx Digital delivers the right transportation and technology solutions and for businesses anytime, anywhere. Short, sharp, snappy, really gives you a flavour of what their digital vision for the future is. And it is very much phrased in future, reference to the future, but what they're experiencing now in the present. And it's also important that leadership are aligned with this digital vision, as again, it's important with any type of change that leadership are aligned with it. And this is so they can communicate properly with their organisation on what the future state is going to look like and the journey to get there. And I'd say the first way to support leadership being aligned to a digital vision is actually involving them in shaping it. And this involves getting people from outside of the normal programme team involved in shaping it. So people across the organisation, from other levels in the organisation as well, not just the top level of leadership, involved in shaping it and really buy into it and communicate it out. The next part of the framework I've got there with the fetching strong man with his weights is building digital change capability. So as you would consider what new skills are required when delivering any type of change, when delivering a digital transformation, in order to be successful, you really need to be clear on what your digital competency framework is. For example, ensuring staff understand how to communicate digitally is very different from how they understand they should communicate in more traditional methods. An example I've got now is kind of how we would communicate with customers, for example, through a social media channel, or how you would deliver a presentation via a webinar, as we are doing today, rather than face-to-face, which comes with its own challenges, technical and otherwise. And the development of these new skills, we need to make sure that they're referencing job descriptions and that they're measured properly through KPIs to make sure that they're still the right ones as transformation continues and people are constantly improving on their digital change capabilities. So, as well as formal digital capability development, you should also outline your desired digital behaviours that support the cultural change that any digital transformation is looking to achieve, or organisations are looking to achieve more broadly operating in a digital environment. And these might include things like encouraging the minimal use of emails and instead encouraging your staff to collaborate using chat functions, which often support quick decision making, for example, all key behaviours that you'd expect to be rife in organisations that are digitally savvy. And then lastly, when we deliver and manage digital programs, where possible, we should always think about using experience-based learning interventions that are intuitive as possible. And one form I've done this in previous projects is actually using digital tools with habit-forming activities. So, for example, it was called the 20-day challenge. 20 days is often bounded around as a time frame that it takes someone to actually break or create a habit. So I've used digital methods and applications to send out activities on a daily basis for 20 days that slowly get people's behaviour to change in order to reach the end state of whatever that digital transformation is aiming to achieve. You should also leverage agile change methodology. And I'd point out that agile delivery methods and agile change methodology itself could be a whole webinar, and perhaps maybe that will be one at a later date. But just a few points I'd like to touch upon, because it would be ignorant of me not to talk about agile when talking about digital, would be that when you're planning change management activities, it's vital that these are aligned to the requirements of each sprint. You map out sprints at the beginning of an agile project, and change management activities should always fall in each of those sprints as well. You should also conduct early and regular showcases of new products and involve people across the organisation in co-creating what those products look like, and also the showcase of them, because that's part of their learning experience as well. And lastly, when delivering and managing digital change, you should also put a strong focus on using digital communications. And that isn't replacing physical communications, but these two definitely should work alongside when you're aiming to deliver digital change, which is something I'm now going to talk to you about as part of a case study that I worked on at a FTSE 250 retailer, where digital communications were really, really important to the success of the overall program. But I would say that as I was leading on the comms, but I'll go into that in a bit more detail now. So, as mentioned, I was the change management lead at this large FTSE 250 electronics retailer. And as part of my role, I was responsible for launching what we termed the customer promise, which I'll explain what that was in a second. But it's important to note that this was being rolled out to both head office staff as well as circa 35,000 people across warehouses and stores in the UK and internationally as well. And the customer promise was created with the aim of translating the company's transformation strategy and the array of projects and programs underneath that supported the achievement of that strategy to staff. And as mentioned, staff both in the head office and stores and warehouses as well, in order to help them understand how transformation would impact them over the next year. It was the annual strategy launch, as well as how they could help make that strategy a success and what their part to play in it was. We also used the communications of the customer promise to aid employee engagement. It was really important that staff across the organisation felt connected to the strategy. And as mentioned, when you're out in kind of a retail park in the middle of the country and you work part-time, it's not as easy to feel connected to the strategy as it might be when the transformation directorate is sitting 20 yards away in the office, or you come across them at the water fountain, for example. So that was a really key part of it too. So in order to communicate the customer promise, the transformation strategy, I utilised many of the approaches that I've spoken about already in this part of the webinar. Firstly, as mentioned, it was key to distinguish between the different audiences. And you'd do this when you approach any communications plan. So change management and communications professionals, as well as other people that are used to communicating as part of projects, will understand this. So, for instance, people that were out in stores, as mentioned, that might work part-time, they don't have their phone on them, they're dealing with customers all day, are going to want to be communicated differently to than someone that's sitting behind a computer screen. So it was important to blur both physical and digital communications because of this dispersed nature of the audience groups. So, for example, in store, they were really, really familiar with using a tool called Yammer, which lots of you might be familiar with. And I'd really love to hear as well tools that you've really enjoyed working with as part of transformations, and particularly, obviously, as we think about the worldwide pandemic, ones that you found most useful to keep abreast of changes in your organisation. But Yammer was used for store staff here particularly, as they were familiar with it, they liked it, and we pushed out messages to store staff on the customer promise through this means because they were familiar with it and they were set up to use it. But we also used a tool called Workplace, which is essentially Facebook for the corporate environment. So another really intuitive tool that most people are familiar with using because of how they use it in their personal lives. And this was a really, really key aspect to the success of the digital communications because it involved both store staff and warehouse staff. And it also was led from leadership. So leadership were really, really active on Workplace and pushed out messages and responded to comments from people. So it brought a lot of live engagement. And this was key as well as part of the physical element of the communications plan. So the top 100 leaders of the organisation actually went out to stores as part of the customer promise change management work stream and engaged with people in terms of what they thought of the customer promise and also what it actually meant for their store as well as the organisation, because that's what lots of store managers were particularly interested in, because it was to do with them hitting their sales targets. And it created a lot of excitement because people posted selfies, they were particularly keen on posting selfies when they were lucky enough to have the CEO visit their store as part of this activity. So they felt like a bit of a celebrity. I think I even got a selfie with some people, which was nice. So we basically undertook a range of activities in order to make sure that the message of the transformation was relayed via digital communications, but had that physical element as well. With these benefits that you can see on screen at the moment, I'm sure that there were improvements to make as well, but it was particularly fed back that the what's in it for me, which is terminology we will all be used to hearing, was well understood. And again, as mentioned, this was particularly important because that would be different dependent on where you are in the country, what your store is, what your role is in the store, what your role is in the head office. We also really gained traction on that live engagement. And as we are experiencing today on the webinar with the live comments, that's extremely important for people to bounce ideas off each other, understand what the transformation's about, what we're here today to talk about, and what that means for them. And also, again, the application to individual store strategies and our stress individual strategies in the head office were important as well, because different elements of the customer promise mattered more dependent upon your role. So I got some good feedback there. So that's the end of my digital change management part of this webinar. And I'm now going to pass back over to Chris and Steve, who are going to talk about a particular project they worked on together. So I'll kick off the conversation by inviting you, Chris, to talk about the project. What was it? What did you do? And how did it go?
Yes. Yeah, thank you very much. So, Steve, if I'm not mistaken, this was the first project we worked on together, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And if I go back to what the original goal was, it was pure and simple to bring about stability to a customer-facing web platform and restore performance. And now a significant amount of time and money had been invested to achieve what was intended to be a trailblazing digital platform, a platform that would revolutionize customer experience and operations, that would stitch together multiple applications and business groups and would be future-proof too, and enable a roadmap of upcoming digital initiatives. However, from day one of the launch, it was associated with lots of issues, both technical and change related. So an example might be, many priority incidents being raised linked with customers seeing loading icons or simply being displayed, page cannot be returned sort of error messages. And this would result in what we referred to as a red alert situation that would consume a lot of people's time and efforts in understanding what the issue was before they could resolve it. Partly because of this and partly because of how the program had originally been delivered, the system did not carry a very positive name across the business or technical support teams. And no one really seemed to like it very much.
Yeah, it's very true. So I joined after this site had gone live. So I was inheriting this challenge, which gave me an opportunity to make a difference. First and foremost, this was impacting our customers, and then that degradation of the service, etc., was not good. For me, in my previous roles, in my previous organisations, I had the tools to understand how the site was performing. I understand the metrics, etc. And having the organisation, I was there, and I'd have the tap on the shoulder, physical tap on the shoulder from one of my digital colleagues to say the site's slowing down. Wasn't a position I wanted to be in, or or should be in. So that's where I had to act quickly and get visibility, and that's where I engaged Oakland to land a capability in with my teams to work through those challenges, and that's where I first introduced to Chris.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. So, why is that topic particularly interesting to people at the CMI and everybody on the webinar today?
Yeah, so I really like this case study because for me the root cause was a mix of both technical and change-related issues. It felt like a perfect storm. Customers were suffering, the business was shouting, tech teams didn't have operational awareness or full control. And you, Steve, mentioning there that you were being tapped on the shoulder was effectively ground swallowing. And this was all in the context of IT teams fighting for more investment, fighting for the right to sit at the top table and be trusted by the business. So it was a perfect project. It was a problem that Steve and the wider client really desperately wanted to solve. It was solvable, and it was also very interesting.
Yeah, so there was, I joined. There was lots of emotion, both in the original implementation, and there was, all I had to keep in the center on our thoughts was there's a customer at the end of this. When we talk about digital, it's customer centric. So what we had to do is put the customer. So how do we go about improving this for a customer? So for me, it's getting the metrics up and down the stack, up and down the technologies. How is it impacting the customer? So and making sure we've got accountability. It's my accountability, working across the teams. It's taking that ownership and saying, right, we're going to sort this out. And obviously, the expertise is then brought in to help. That short, sharp. How do we go about this?
Perfect, thank you. So what choices did you have to make in order to understand the path of the transformation?
Yeah, good question, Katie. So we needed to make improvements. That was pure and simple. But we were in a constant state of firefighting because of the platform outages or problems associated with that. So to do nothing was not an option, and we had to gain stability for long enough to get some purchase and forward momentum so that we could start to regain control. So a couple of things things that we did. We set up a troubleshooting SWAT team, to form and swarm around the issue, to take accountability and deliver incremental improvement using an agile method. We developed hypotheses for what could be the problem and went about proving whether or not they were. We elicited feedback from a wide range of stakeholders about what was important to them and developed a single unifying list of everything that they fed back to us. And this included business teams with what they had originally wanted the product to do versus what operations teams, whose day-to-day role was to support the system, about what caused them the most pain. We pulled all that information into a central backlog and prioritized it with a single nominated product owner. And then we rallied the team around the work and tackled what we like to call the Billy basics. So every time there was an outage, we took control, we swarmed around the issue, we conducted root cause analysis, communicated and shared the outcome. We introduced visibility into the system we were working with, and we pulled collateral together, saved it in a single and central place so that people knew about it. And we used the walls, which may sound small, but to me makes a big difference. In fact, one of the first things I look at when I go to any client organization is whether or not they use the walls to help visualize what they're working on, communicate, and demonstrate progress. And we track the flow of our work on a Kanban board, and importantly, we celebrated our successes.
Yeah, it makes me smile every time you say that using the walls, because it was the first thing I think I said when I joined an organization as well. Making work visible, not just putting post-it notes up or motivational posters up on the wall for the sake of it, but using the walls to make work visible was absolutely critical for this and other projects, because it does a number of things. It shows what you're on with. It allows your executives or anyone to come past and challenge and ask questions. It allows the conversation to happen. Now, obviously, in the lockdown situation, some of that may be virtual, but that virtual board, that virtual walk past, is incredibly important. And making the work visible. Chris talked about swarming. You get a number of people around a problem, and it's amazing how much can be done if that's their focus, as we've seen over again in the last several weeks of us all working from home, and how much change can happen. But often you don't, that team isn't dedicated, or those members aren't dedicated to that issue. So making the work visible, making all their work visible, allows you to have the prioritization conversation. And really, we often say this is the number one, but it allows those conversations. So it helps with conflict. And you can see the progress. You can see the daily progress by using the walls, using whether it's Kanban or any other methodology. So, yeah, using walls is something I'll take away from this.
Thank you, Steve. And in terms of kind of what the outcomes were, have you got anything we can share on the benefits?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I thought we might provide a couple more specifics, really, because I mentioned before the good bit about this project was that it spanned across technical and also people and process activities. So a couple of examples that we focused on. I mentioned the term Billy Basics, and for me, really, what that meant was things like we made sure environments technical testing development environments were like for like, so that if we tested something in a lower environment, we knew that that's how it was going to behave when we promoted it to production. We applied the latest software patches, and we brought the system up to supplier recommended status versions. We increased the amount of information we could get via enhanced logging and telemetry, which we then analyzed for patterns. And we added extra capacity to the system to give ourselves a fighting chance, because every time there was an outage, it seemed because the capacity was being used up. We ran a huge volume of tests to continuously probe whether or not the things we were doing were making a difference. And we procured and implemented an application performance monitoring tool that could give us awareness of every layer of the technology stack and what customers were experiencing. Previously, individual teams had their own products that each told a slightly different story about a specific part of the platform, but wasn't in any way joined up or coherent.
Yeah, I think I just need to expand a little bit on the application performance monitoring tool, because that's it's something, again, one of the big takeaways for me. Each of the technology stratas, whether it's your DBAs, whether it's your network people, whether it's operating system level, each will have their tools, and they are experts in those tools, and they can tell you, to the nth degree how well their bit's performing. What I didn't have is what was the customer experiencing. I don't care if a particular server's down, if it's in a cluster, and the whole design of it is to allow a server to go down, but the site is performant. Don't care. That's what technology is all about. What I do care about is if a customer clicks on a button, there's a degradation of service. If you click on something and it's not working within seconds or milliseconds these days, they're going to walk away, or they're going to be dissatisfied. I can't have that. What an application performance monitoring tool brought me was that visibility. I could monitor someone's clickability, and we could trace through the stack where the delays were, and that for me was incredibly powerful. Again, comes back to being customer centric. It comes back to getting the right tooling for the right thing. We had a specific issue, and for me, again, it's been a real godsend moving forward in the last few years as well.
Yeah, exactly right, Steve. And I also mentioned some people and process or typical digital change management type examples that we did. Linking very much back to what Katie was saying, we focused on education, communication, and reinforcement, so that everyone who was part of what we were doing were very clear on what we were doing, why we were doing it, and how we were doing it. We ran retrospectives or lesson learned sessions throughout the process so that we could continuously take feedback and apply that to the work that we would then do. And the monitoring tool itself was also nice because it broke us away from this seemingly finger-pointing blame culture scenario that had emerged through those earlier red alert processes that are described, as it gave full awareness of where the issues were. And in fact, it prevented them from happening in the first place. We were able, as a result of these things, to turn the project and platform name away from a dirty word and made it a joint responsibility.
Yeah, you'll see a common thread of what I've taken away from this, and it's that visualization, whether it's on the wall, through the application performance monitoring tooling, and that putting on screens. So we, in our operations center, we had a screen when we could see the flow and how the site was performing, and we took time to mature that dashboards so we could alert, as well as you could automate, integrate it with your alerting tools, etc., and also give that visibility back to our internal customer, whether it's digital business channels as well. So putting it out on the screen, sharing the challenge, being upfront, hitting the challenge face on, was critical.
Yeah. So back to your earlier question, Katie, about what the results were. Well, hopefully the table that you can see just describes that in some way. We delivered a good many backlog items spanning across technical and change. We supported a number of proof of concept or proof of values experiments, and supported 2 major campaigns that would result in real spikes in customer traffic coming to that website without the platform going down and without it absorbing too much operations teams' times. I mentioned the software tool that we procured and implemented, and what that all meant was that over time we saw a significant reduction in the number of outages or problems that occurred on the platform. We didn't get rid of them altogether, but they were very few in the last period that we worked on this project, and every time it happened we knew exactly why, so that we could resolve it. And this was all in a backdrop of increasing customer traffic, which meant increased business and increased revenue for our client base, and also the teams that supported the platform, if they wanted to make changes to it, they could do so without the fear that it would be interrupted. Now, Steve, I think you were going to talk a little bit about what's happened since. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So this challenge was a good few years ago, and technology moves on. But what is in effect today still is the application performance monitoring tool. We actually took that and extended it across the websites and our sites, and we actually deployed it in another part of the organization and in another technology stack. That the value had proven itself. So often what you find is you need to get something in to show its value. This was it. And for us, deploying this in other spaces as well has been incredibly important. The organization has been moving on digitally, and obviously with the acquisition of OVO, we're bringing some really good people and processes together, and that direction continues. Marketing automation is absolutely at the heart of what we do as well. It gives the work, myself and Chris and the team, and this is a team effort. This isn't us doing it. You've got the technical, clever people that are working this through. Gave the other teams the ability to look ahead, and rather than firefighting, we could plan for what's next. What's important was the funding model, and I think is do you pay for an outcome? And this is where bringing in specialists in, the likes of Oakley, in, you pay for an outcome based, this is what we need to solve, or do you pay for a run rate? You've got a team that's actually got something to iterate on. Are they trying to deliver a customer journey improvement on a website? So that thinking has definitely matured over the last few years, Chris, and getting the trust back that we're IT isn't a separate function. It is how organizations work. A bit like the word digital, I suspect, will be dropped in years to come because it's just the way that the world turns. So getting that being trusted again was incredibly important.
Thank you very much, both. Unless you've got any final thoughts, we'll move on to the questions that have been submitted by our valuable audience today, both during the session, and we've had a few come in before as part of the sign-up process. So thank you very much to everybody that's provided comments as we've gone along, as well as before. And I think I'll kick off. I saw a comment kind of further up from Savvy, which really interested me, actually, from a change management perspective, particularly because he noted that written communication is here to stay, whether we like it or not, be it digital or otherwise. And I think it's really, really important to highlight that written communication is clearly the basis of any digital communication, building on kind of what I spoke about earlier. But it has different focuses to it. So it's still important that when you're writing digital communications, you focus on your audience, as I mentioned, and also that you've got a consistent tone, but you understand where it's going out to and by what means, because people are going to access digital communications on iPads, on phones, they might be viewing presentations online. So it's really, really important that you take that into consideration when writing. So there could be whole training courses on writing digital communications because it has a slightly different slant to how you would usually approach that writing. So it's a really good point to highlight, Savvy. So thank you very much for mentioning that.
Yeah, I picked up one, Katie, from one that was actually emailed in prior to the webinar, and it was digital change requires a new set of skills for leaders in terms of being able to manage by outcome. So for me, actually, whether it's the formal role of a leader or actually we're all leaders, yes, we need to change the way that we work with our teams. Leaders need to trust the expertise of the teams. We can set direction. You talked about a vision. We can set direction, but not the how. It's the doers, the actual people on the ground doing this day and out. They might need seeded some expertise, external expertise, to help galvanize ideas and thoughts, but it's actual doers, and leadership needs to allow for that to happen. So it comes back to the funding model. Are we funding for a short, sharp, here's a thing to sort out an upgrade or a piece of tech to implement or something? That's a traditional project. You can still use some of the good practices from Agile in that, but you can just short, sharp. Or are you paying for a capability where you're actually getting a team together, 7-8 people together to iterate around something? You launch a particular customer journey on the website or a capability. You'll hypothesize of how that should work. You'll get metrics to see how that works, and then you iterate again, and that requires a funding for a capability rather than a fixed amount of money. And you can just keep iterating. Have what we delivered in the previous 3 weeks or quarter justified the funding for the next 3 weeks or quarter? So keep playing that back, keep that unlocks the next phase of value. So leadership needs to allow for the doers, the people that actually ultimately run your organization, to get on with the job.
Yeah, no, nice, Steve. I saw an interesting question there, which was how to manage fragmented platforms and multi-channels of information, so that you can avoid risks in miscommunication and also any lost productivity as a result of rework due to perhaps a lack of clarity. I find this quite an interesting one, because actually as a consultant, we face this very often when going into client organizations, where there are multiple systems, multiple applications, lots of people working on different things. And really the way we try and go about that is to look at the overarching op model. And what I mean by operating model is you typically look at the people, the processes, and the technology that exists in your organization. And for this one, you tend to focus a lot on the process and the technology. So, if there are multiple systems, then actually a lot of the work we do is to help clients bring them together. And if that's not possible, then you might look at the processes. So there may be specific process procedures, workarounds, the way that teams interact with each other that can address any shortfall. Really, without doing those things, there will be a continual risk of miscommunication and rework, and therefore, what you need to prove as a real clear expectation from leadership is to have clear and consistent comms, applied through different channels, like the example that Katie mentioned, so that you try and mitigate those as best as possible. If you don't mind me grabbing another one there, Katie, one thing I quite liked was what are examples of best practices. Now, conscious we've covered a broad spectrum here, but I noticed in one of your slides, and you might want to talk about this, Katie, is ProSci and what that is, but specifically when it comes to digital ways of working. So we typically talk about Agile. Then those of you may know the Scrum Alliance or SAFe, a Scaled Agile Framework, or LESS. There's a plethora of bodies that provide professional training and guidance and advice. Also, lots of really good stuff to read up on the internet. For Lean, in terms of streamlined process improvement and process management, you've got Six Sigma, who do a range of colorful belts you can acquire the more advanced you become. And I'm particularly interested in DevOps. It's quite a broad topic again, but how you can really focus on the value chain of doing technical and digital delivery, and how you can get that into the hands of your users as quickly as possible using some pretty cool technology. And again, there's lots of information available to you, but one particular individual, chap called Gene Kim, who has a company called IT Revolution, has written lots of things about that. And if anyone out there is new to that topic, I'd really recommend a book called The Phoenix Project, which is pretty insightful. And then of course, for the service management side of things, there's the good old IT infrastructure library, ITIL. which has just recently been updated to version 4 to take advantage of some of these more modern ways of working and referencing. Katie, I didn't know if you wanted to mention ProSci.
Yes, yeah, thank you. So as mentioned earlier on in my presentation, I really like the change management definition that ProSci brings about, and at Oaklyn, our change management capability really draws heavily on the thinking of ProSci, and especially the ADKAR model, which is something I've always been a really keen advocate as my change management career has developed. And no one methodology can be definitely put at the top of the list to say it's better than all, and we've had comments in the bar on the right that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to any of this. Other methodologies that you might draw upon might be Kotter, the nudge theory, the McKinsey 7S model. There's lots of them around, but I really like the ProSci model just because of its simplicity and application to change management. So if no one else is familiar, or you are and you'd like a reminder, so ADKAR stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. So we've had lots of comments around awareness of the need for change, and particular conversations going between people, which is really good to see in the chat bar around whether or not that awareness should come from the top or the bottom, and whether it should be change that's driven by leadership or kind of from the ground upwards. And again, I've always been a very strong advocate that you need both, but really it's the people that are going to be impacted by the change that can have a lot of influence on it and drive awareness of it. And that we've also mentioned change champion networks in the bar on the right-hand side. They're absolutely key, not just with digital transformations, but any, that you get kind of a broad set of employees that are going to be able to influence the fact that this transformation is happening and get people on board with it, and actually help us understand as a program what the impacts of that is. So really, really, really key to get people creating an awareness, both from the bottom and the top, as I've already spoken, leadership awareness of the program and actually how they communicate that downwards, but couldn't advocate more strongly the bottom up awareness. Then we've got desire to support the change. So people have to have something in it for them. You're unlikely to be able to want to change, have a desire to change if there's nothing that's going to improve because of your life and because of the change. And that's both from a personal perspective and professional perspective. So you need to make sure those messages are key as well. The knowledge of how to change. We've talked about different learning experiences and building skills. If people don't practically know how they're going to operate in any new environments that a transformation is producing, they're not going to be able to change. You need to provide people with the education, with the tools, with the thinking in order to operate most successfully. We've also got the second A, ability to demonstrate skills and behaviours, which is really linked to the knowledge of how to change, but has a more practical application. And then the reinforcement to make the change stick. So it doesn't end at the end of the transformation programme. We're really strongly focused on continuous improvement at Oaklyn as well. And that's something that I'm particularly interested in terms of the human side of change, how we continuously evolve and reflect on transformations and make them better. So reinforcement to make it stick is really, really important, because unless it sticks, the transformation hasn't been successful. You decided you wanted a change and it was going to be of benefit to your organisation. We need it to work, and we need to continuously monitor that it's still working and make further improvements going forward. So that's a brief run through of the ADKAR ProSci model.
Cool, thanks, Katie. Chris, can I just pick up on two things you mentioned, and a couple of people just mentioned in there. One is, if anyone's from an IT background and just want to get their head around, DevOps and transformation, the Phoenix Project by Gene Kim, and there's some other authors to that. It actually sounds dull. Hold your horses here, guys. It's a novel and it's based on a fictitious company, and you follow the people through it, and there's all the types. And if you've ever worked in IT, you will spot every single character, from the SME that just knows it all, and everyone goes to that one person and they're maxed out 24/7, to the shouty one, etc. Cannot highly, I'm not on any money, I'm not part co-authored or anything. Highly recommend that. And the other thing, and you mentioned it, I think, Chris, is ITIL. And again, that could be seen as, that's last year's and stuff like that. ITIL 4, or those sorts of, those frameworks for service introduction, service design, service introduction, is critical. Doesn't stop the agility, but as long as you know how you're going to do it within your small teams, or if you have a more traditional separation of development on operations or the people monitoring. But ITIL version 4 brings in and expects, the modern digital world, and you can come in and just pick and choose the things that are most important to you. So read the Phoenix project and ITIL version 4 and that whole service introduction, service design. That doesn't go away.
Yeah, that takes me back to the early days of my career on a graduate scheme in the IT department at the police, trawling through my mini ITIL, knowledge book, which I didn't expect to be doing that early on in my career, but has proved me well. Thank you very much, both. I think we've come to the end of the Q&A with the audience now. So thank you everyone for being so engaging. This is some of the best engagement I've seen on any of these webinars. And as mentioned, I actually sit on the CMI board, so I've been a part of lots of these, and we've gained some real good traction in terms of conversation. I'm just trying not to be distracted by people's comments, so they're good to see. And so I'd just like to finish by again saying thank you so much to Steve and Chris, and to the CMI for inviting us to do this webinar. It's been really, really great to depart some of our hopeful, useful knowledge on navigating change and tell you a bit more about what we've done at organisations to help them navigate change, as well as other capabilities that Oakland can offer in terms of change management and digital and all the other good things that are involved in actually leading transformations. So just as a reminder, we will be sending out these slides after the presentation. And to continue with the digital theme, we'll be filming, as we're so natural behind the camera now, the questions and answers that we haven't managed to get to. So expect to see those in your inbox soon, and there will be an evaluation form there too. So tell us what was great, what was not so great. We want to hear it all so we can improve these for the future. And just one last plug, there is a CMI Women event this evening at 8 p.m. If you'd like to search for the CMI Women group on our Facebook page, there will be a live event that will be on managing in the new. So that'll be really good to see as many of you there as possible as well. Thank you very much. And that is the end of the webinar. So enjoy the rest of your days all.